different than in other cultures. Sometimes they're a celebration of life. And that's kind of counter to what we see sometimes in mainstream society. And so what happens from a spiritual aspect is something has been then feeding this death spirit. And maybe it is a mental health diagnosis, maybe it's trauma. You know, and in the community I'm from, one of the questions that was asked was, you know, did these young men have food in the house? Was there a lack of food? Were drugs and alcohol present? What has been feeding this death spirit? And then what can we do to feed this life spirit? Is it ceremony? Is it family? Is it love? Is it prayer? Is it a clinician? What is it? And being open to looking at all of those things holistically, and maybe it is that healing for the entire family. Because what we saw in our community was brothers, people in the same household. One of my closest friends from suicide stood in his backyard and died by suicide in the exact same spot, planted his feet in the same spot that his older brother had died by suicide 5 years prior when we were in high school. These are generational things, and he did it there because he wanted to honor his brother and he wanted to end the pain. And he did it very suddenly. And these things are normalized, right? So at that time, we weren't in a crisis and we weren't making the LA Times and we weren't talking about this because these things were felt, again, invisibly and silently. And so if I could just encourage communities to talk about, you know, communities of color, exactly like you said, how can we address these issues right now? There's a $10 million ask of the state budget to address Native youth issues. And it seems like, oh, there's this policy plug, but there are Native youth issues that we're all seeing around us and that we're not seeing around us. And I think as a community, we have to begin to acknowledge who is around us, what are we experiencing, and what can we do as a community to support one another. And I see that on these signs, like if one of us isn't well, we're all not well. And I think that's a long-held belief within Indigenous communities that I'm happy to see in more broader community spaces, because I think that is really the truth. We all have to be, we're all connected in that way, and there's, you know, old tribal sayings that we're all related and we're all family in one way or another. And I think in this Western mainstream society, we have to begin to acknowledge that, or we're going to continue to see crises like suicide, like the opioid crisis, and these things that are damaging our communities if we don't collectively take ownership of the issue.
Thank you so much for that. Kevin, I would like to hear from you. What are some ways, as someone who has dealt with suicidal ideation, what are some ways that you would advise loved ones of those who are also battling this? How can they help them in a way that makes them feel empowered?
I often think about how some people treated me in psych wards and how some family members just didn't show up. And when I look back at the 7 psych ward stays I've been in, and I look back at when I called those people and said, please show up, and they didn't, it broke me. You know, in the 7 psych wards I've been in, 6 people came regularly. And the people I called otherwise that I wanted to come, they didn't have the time, energy, or ability because it was too painful for them, but I needed them. And I think about how we look at and marginalize our young people who battle mental and brain pain. We have to treat them first as human beings with feelings and emotions and mental stability and instability, and second, treat them as a consumer or a patient. I hate both those words. We're not consumers. We're not a bunch of shoppers at Target. I mean, we are, but that's a problem. But we are at the root, all of us in this kind of pain are citizens of hope, trying to find it, trying to stay here. And when the people we love don't show up, it breaks us. So show up, meet the person in pain where they're at, not where you want them to be. Recognize that they're the one going through it, even though they're causing tertiary and secondary pain to the rest of the family. They're the ones that are battling the darkness inside of them, and it is thriving. Reach into that darkness and shine some light with unconditional love, complete empathy, a total lack of judgment, and constant, unrelenting care.
Thank you. So, I am a poet by trade, and everything that they're saying, I'm like, yes, we are citizens of hope. Yes, life spirit. So, on the topic of art, since We Rise is an art festival, I'm looking at this piece here. They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds. And it's my understanding or experience in life that in the most adverse circumstances, in the darkest of circumstances, we're able to glean a light that we didn't know existed within us. And Katie, you and Kevin as well, you both have created these potent pieces of art that are helping other people in their healing journeys. And I would like to hear more in particular about how art and creativity helped heal you.
Yeah, I think writing is very therapeutic. I don't know what to do with a paintbrush. I'm horrible with a pencil. If I try to do a sketch, I admire when someone can. I've never made a film. I admire that as well. I think whatever outlet we have, as a 16-year-old, I had a pen and a notebook, and that was my way. It's still my way. Yeah, I think it's so healing, I think, to review your old work as well. Something about journaling, I don't know if many people in here do it, I'm saying nods, just even as a regular practice. You know where you were 3 months ago or 6 months ago, and the things you were thinking about and the things you were worried about, some of them have already gone away from today. Not to minimize anything large going on, they don't all go away, but it's such a perspective giver. So art for me has always been words. So in the notebook and reaching out to people, and I found that to be extremely helpful, and I still do. And then other people's art helps me to see things in a new perspective as well. Thank you. Kevin?
I went through the gallery 3 times while you guys were watching the film, and I gotta tell you, I am more inspired by the We Rise event here than I've been in a long time. And looking at the history of brain, mind, behavioral, and mental health through the lens of the artist, and getting to meet some of the artists here today, it's changing me, you know? Before I ever made a film or wrote a book, I have hundreds of sketchbooks since kindergarten, mostly filled with superheroes and supervillains that I would make up and create, and I wrote stories for every single one of these characters, and they're just for me. And one of the things that I realized at 16, when my mom looked at something I thought was a masterpiece, and she goes, "Kevin, it's terrifying. It's dark, it's violent, it's aggressive, it's angry, it's got red demon eyes." And she went on, and I said, "Mom, no, it's a masterpiece." And she goes, "No, Kevin, look at it. Look at how terrifying it is." And I stopped. And I stopped drawing for a while. And then I was in my 3rd psych ward stay, and I made a decision that every drawing I would go and create from that day forward, no one would ever say anything about it, but that's beautiful. That's hopeful. It's filled with light and love. And I stopped drawing terrifying things that I was seeing in my head, because I have auditory and visual hallucinations on a regular basis. I see things that nobody should see, that terrify me on a regular basis, that nobody else can see. And that's where that came from. But when I draw things that are beautiful, I think beautiful thoughts. And when I think beautiful thoughts, I do beautiful things. And I embody that beauty with what I draw, and it helps me. So that's art therapy for all of us. Your writing is your therapy, and this is my therapy. And every sketchbook I finish until the day I die of natural causes will be filled with beauty.
Thank you.
So I have a question for Virginia and Dr. Bonds. obviously, the crisis amongst suicide rates with young people of color are spiking, and that is a cultural problem that we need to solve on the cultural level or the societal level. But what are some things that, if I'm an audience member and I want to help counteract this, what are some things that I could do to help?
Yeah, I think acknowledging, so Dr. Bonds mentioned earlier the talk curriculum, the Safe Talk curriculum is about listening to the invitations when someone's trying to tell you. And you mentioned earlier in your earlier question, you asked, that often people aren't believed, or, in communities of color, it's minimized, we shouldn't talk about it, it's shameful. So to listen to those invitations when someone is telling you something, and to ask them directly, and then to be there with them and stay with them and listen to what they're experiencing. You don't always have to understand it, and so I have a 17-year-old son, and he gets really worked up about things that I'm like, this is not a big deal. I'm telling you, like, it's not. Like, in a week from now, you won't even think about this girl. But he'll be so worked up, like, I can't eat, and he's having all of this, just stress and just drama about it. And I have to remember that our experiences are different, and I don't have to understand what he's experiencing, but I can empathize, and I may not even be able to validate it because it's not my experience, but I do need to hear him out and understand that I understand where he's coming from and see what it is that he needs. What is it? Is it space? Is it just to listen, just to sit and listen? Sometimes that's all our young people need, is someone to hear their whole story and not tell them that it was wrong or that that's not how it happened, or to get over it. I think in communities of color, and particularly in Indian country, we experience so much trauma. I was sharing earlier that I have been to I can't even name all the funerals that I've been to, but it's just a normal part of life. And so for me to tell my dad, funerals make me really sad, he's like, get over it. Get over it. That can't make you sad, get over it. And that's just one small example of where how your feeling might be minimized, because everyone's been through that. There's a scale of sexual abuse. Well, how bad was it? What really happened? That's not so bad. That kind of happens to everybody, right? So that shouldn't be the thing that gets you down. Move on from it. And I think those kinds of behaviors where we normalize trauma, or we become desensitized to something that may actually impact somebody far greater than it impacts you, and to be able to hear them out, even if it's not something that you understand, is really important across communities.
Well, I don't know if I could say it any better than Virginia and Kevin here, but as a professional, I know that when I work with individuals who are having thoughts about suicide, and I try to work with their families as well, because it doesn't happen in isolation. On average, a person who dies from suicide, it affects at least 6 other people. So if we were to do an experiment to say, everybody who's been touched by suicide, by the time we got to the end of that experiment, everybody in the room would be standing. And not just because this is a specialized audience, but because it's that broad in its scope. The first thing I would say is, don't feel like you need to do it all yourself. Realize that there are professionals out there who are trained and who are available, and yes, sometimes they're busy, so you're not always going to get them. So there are times when you do have to step in, but a part of it, I think, is the responsibility of us as relatives, friends, family members, and even the person who might be having suicidal thoughts, to come up with what I would call a safety plan. And you'll hear this referred to as when you're doing well, when you're having a good day. Think about, what can I do to feel better when I'm having one of those down days? And we all have those down days. Traffic, gotta pay my phone bill, miss my bus. Those are all the sorts of things that can be temporary, but for someone who's having depression and cognitive distortions that come from that depression, it can seem overwhelming. So a lot of our job is to make them realize that they may feel like they can only reach this far, but through our support, through our empathic listening, they can reach this far, they can reach a lot further. So it's about being there, being an ear for people to listen to, and it's not always easy. I'll say it, having talked with members of my family who have had those thoughts, talking on the phone, on call, with a patient or a client or a member, or I don't like that word consumer either, but someone who's receiving services. A lot of times it's about just being there for them, just knowing that you're a phone call away. and knowing that when they're feeling low, I think Kevin alluded to this, having to listen